The perfect family's facade shattered when police stormed their breakfast table. But when the mother answered a mysterious call the next day, her trembling hands revealed an even darker secret. The yellow curtains filtered the morning sunlight into Sarah's kitchen as she pushed her Fruit Loops around the milk with her spoon. Her mother stood at the counter, pouring coffee into her father's favorite mug, the chipped one with "World's Best Dad" printed in faded letters. "Sarah, honey, stop playing with your food," her mother said, setting the coffee pot down. "You'll be late for school." Sarah scooped up a spoonful of cereal, watching the milk drip back into the bowl. Her father sat across from her, his eyes fixed on his phone as he scrolled through emails. The kitchen clock ticked away the quiet morning minutes, 7:43 a.m. "Did you finish your math homework?" her father asked, not looking up. "Yes, Daddy." Sarah adjusted the pink bow in her braided hair. "Mrs. Peterson said I'm getting better at fractions." The sharp knock at the front door made Sarah jump, milk splashing onto the tablecloth. 3 loud bangs followed, echoing through the house. "Police! Open up!" Her father's phone clattered onto his plate. Coffee spilled across the table as he stood up too quickly, knocking his mug over. Sarah had never seen that look on his face before, like all the blood had drained away. "Mark!" Her mother's voice cracked. "What's happening?" Before anyone could move, the front door burst open. Heavy boots thundered through the house. Sarah's spoon fell from her hand as 4 police officers in black tactical gear stormed into the kitchen, guns drawn. "Hands where we can see them. Everyone on the ground." Sarah's chair toppled backward as she scrambled away from the table. Her mother screamed. Her father raised his hand slowly, coffee still dripping from the edge of the table. "Please," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "My daughter. Let me tell her it's okay. On your knees. Now." The closest officer moved behind Sarah's father, forcing him down. Sarah pressed herself against the kitchen wall, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Her mother tried to reach for her, but another officer blocked the way. "Mommy." Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "It's okay, baby," her mother said, but her trembling voice told a different story. "Everything's going to be okay." One of the officers started reading from a piece of paper. "Mark Anderson, you are under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy." The words blurred together in Sarah's ears as she watched them put handcuffs on her father. The metal clicked shut with a sound that would echo in her nightmares. "Sarah," her father turned toward her, still on his knees. "Be brave for Mommy, okay? I love you both so much, Dash. That's enough." The officer cut him off, pulling him to his feet. Sarah's legs moved before her mind could catch up. She darted past the officers, ignoring her mother's calls, and ran out the front door. The morning air hit her face as she reached the sidewalk, still in her pajamas, watching them walk her father to a police car. "Daddy!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Don't take my daddy!" Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Peterson from next door stood on her porch in her bathrobe, hand over her mouth. Mr. Garcia stopped watering his lawn to stare. Sarah saw their faces through a blur of tears, shock, curiosity, pity. The police car's back door slammed shut. Sarah caught one last glimpse of her father through the window before the car pulled away from the curb. She ran after it, bare feet slapping against the concrete, until it turned the corner and disappeared. Her mother's arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her close. Sarah could feel her shaking. "Come inside, baby," her mother whispered, voice thick with tears. "Please come inside." But Sarah couldn't move. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the empty street where the police car had been. Her bowl of Fruit Loops would be getting soggy on the kitchen table. Her father's coffee would be drying in brown stains on the tablecloth. The morning sun kept shining through those yellow curtains like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The neighbors were still watching. Sarah heard whispers, saw phones recording. Her mother's grip tightened around her shoulders. "Sarah, please." Her mother's voice was barely audible. "We need to go inside." Sarah's feet felt heavy as lead as she let her mother guide her back toward the house. The front door hung open, early morning air drifting through. Inside, the officers who stayed behind were going through drawers, taking pictures, putting things in plastic bags. "Mrs. Anderson, One of them said, "We'll need you to answer some questions." Sarah's mother straightened her spine, wiped her eyes. "Let me take care of my daughter first." She led Sarah upstairs to her bedroom, past the family photos on the wall, vacation at the beach, Christmas morning, her father pushing her on a swing. Each one felt like a lie now. "Change out of your pajamas," her mother said, pulling clothes from Sarah's dresser with shaking hands. "I'll be right back, okay? Don't come downstairs until I get you." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure her mother even saw it before closing the door. Through her bedroom floor, she could hear muffled voices from downstairs, her mother's quiet responses to loud questions. She changed into jeans and her favorite yellow sweater, movements mechanical. Her backpack sat by her desk, packed for a normal school day that would never happen now. The clock on her nightstand showed 8:15 a.m. 30 minutes ago, she'd been eating breakfast with both her parents. Sarah sat on her bed, hugging her knees to her chest, listening to the sounds of strangers taking her family apart piece by piece. She could hear drawers opening and closing, cabinets being searched, her mother's occasional sob. Eventually, the voices and footsteps faded. Car doors slammed outside. Sarah crept to her window and watched 3 more police cars drive away. Her mother stood in the driveway, clutching a business card and what looked like more papers, watching them leave. When her mother finally came back upstairs, her eyes were red but dry. She sat on Sarah's bed, pulling her close. "No school today," she said, running her fingers through Sarah's braids. The pink bow was crooked now. "We're going to stay home and figure things out together. When is Daddy coming back?" Her mother's hand froze mid-stroke. "I don't know, baby. I really don't know." Sarah leaned into her mother's embrace, breathing in her familiar lavender perfume. Outside, she could still hear the neighbors talking, phones ringing as the news spread through their quiet street. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, warming her face through the window. But Sarah felt cold inside, like she'd never be warm again. "Mommy," she whispered. "Yes, baby?" "What did Daddy do?" Her mother's arms tightened around her. In the silence that followed, Sarah could hear the kitchen clock still ticking downstairs, counting off seconds in a world that had stopped making sense. "I don't know," her mother finally said. "But we're going to be okay. I promise we're going to be okay." Sarah wasn't sure she believed her, but she nodded anyway, because that's what brave girls did. And her father had told her to be brave. Through her window, she watched Mrs. Peterson finally go back inside her house. Mr. Garcia turned his sprinkler off. The street looked normal again, peaceful even. But Sarah knew better now. She knew how quickly peace could shatter, how easily a normal morning could break into pieces that could never be put back together again. The kitchen clock kept ticking downstairs, counting toward whatever came next. Sarah sat at her bedroom window that afternoon, watching another police car drive slowly past their house. The officers inside turned their heads to look, but they didn't stop this time. Her mother hadn't left the kitchen since the phone started ringing 3 hours ago. "No comment," she kept saying, her voice getting quieter each time. "Please stop calling." The landline rang again. Sarah heard the receiver slam down harder this time, followed by a quiet sob. Her stomach growled. They hadn't eaten since the interrupted breakfast, but Sarah didn't want to go downstairs. Her father's coffee stain was probably still on the tablecloth. Mrs. Peterson appeared on her front porch across the street again, phone pressed to her ear. She paced back and forth, gesturing with her free hand. Sarah could read the words on her lips even from here. "I always knew something wasn't right about him." The phone rang downstairs again. "I said stop calling." Her mother's voice cracked. Then softer, "I'm sorry, Richard." "Yes, I know you're just trying to help." Sarah pressed her ear against her bedroom door, straining to hear. "The police took everything, Richard. His laptop, his phone, files I didn't even know existed." A pause. "No, I had no idea. How could I not have known?" Another pause, longer this time. 20 years? They're saying, "Oh, God." Her mother's voice broke. "What am I going to tell Sarah?" Sarah backed away from the door, bumping into her dresser. The framed photo of her father teaching her to ride a bike crashed to the floor, glass cracking across his face. "Sarah?" Her mother called up. "Are you okay?" "Yes, Mommy." She kicked the broken frame under her bed. "Just drop something." Footsteps on the stairs. Sarah quickly sat at her desk and opened her math notebook, pretending to work on fractions. Her mother appeared in the doorway, phone clutched in her hand. "That was Uncle Richard," she said, forcing a smile. "He's going to help us find a good lawyer for Daddy." Sarah drew circles in her notebook, dividing them into pieces. "Is 20 years a long time?" Her mother's face went white. "You heard that? Is it longer than I've been alive?" "Oh, baby." Her mother sat on the bed, patting the space next to her. "Come here." Sarah stayed at her desk. "You said we'd figure things out together." "I know, and we will. But some things I need to understand first myself." The landline rang again downstairs. Her mother closed her eyes. "Let me get that. Try to do some homework." "Okay." But as soon as her mother left, Sarah crept to the top of the stairs. The voice on the other end was loud enough to hear. "Marie, the FBI is involved now. This isn't just some small-time fraud case." "FBI?" Her mother whispered the letters like they were a curse. "But Mark said he was just a store manager. He had offshore accounts, shell companies. They've been building this case for months. I don't understand any of this." "Listen, there's something else. They found documents in a storage unit under a fake name." You need to dash. Her mother must have noticed Sarah on the stairs because she quickly turned away, lowering her voice. "I'll call you back." Sarah retreated to her room before her mother could catch her listening again. She pulled her diary from under her pillow, the one with puppies on the cover that her father gave her for her last birthday. The inscription inside read, "For my little girl, who makes every day brighter. Love, Daddy." She ripped the page out and crumpled it up. The rest of the afternoon dragged by in a blur of ignored homework and unanswered phones. Sarah heard car doors slamming outside, voices calling questions, cameras clicking. Her mother kept the curtains drawn. Around dinner time, the doorbell rang. Sarah peeked through her blinds to see Mrs. Peterson standing on their porch with a casserole dish. "We're not accepting visitors," her mother said through the closed door. "Marie, please. I just want to help. Like you helped by telling Channel 5 News about Mark's suspicious behavior. I saw you on TV, Linda. The truth was going to come out anyway. People have a right to know Dash. My daughter has a right to privacy." The door rattled as her mother slammed her palm against it. "Go home." Sarah heard the casserole dish clatter as Mrs. Peterson set it on the porch. "Well, it's here if you want it. And Marie, I'm sorry, but we all trusted him too." That night, Sarah sat picking at a peanut butter sandwich while her mother made more phone calls in the living room. The kitchen felt too big with just the two of them. Her father's empty chair seemed to stare at her. "No, Mom, don't come over," she heard her mother say. "We just need some time." "Yes, I know the news is everywhere." "No, I haven't watched it." Sarah reached for the remote to turn on the kitchen TV, but her mother appeared instantly. "Don't." She took the remote and unplugged the TV, hands shaking. Later, as Sarah got ready for bed, she found her mother sitting on the floor of her parents' bedroom, surrounded by papers pulled from her father's desk. "Mommy." Her mother quickly gathered the papers, shoving them into a drawer. "You should be asleep. Can I stay with you tonight?" Her mother's face softened. "Of course, baby." They lay together in the big bed, the space where her father should be growing colder by the minute. Sarah breathed in his lingering scent on his pillow while her mother stroked her hair. "Daddy didn't do bad things, did he?" Sarah whispered into the darkness. "The police made a mistake?" The hand in her hair paused. "I don't know what's true anymore, Sarah. But I promise, no matter what happens, you did nothing wrong. None of this is your fault." "But what if Dash, sleep now?" Her mother cut her off gently. "School tomorrow. Do I have to go?" A long pause. "Yes. We can't hide forever." Sarah closed her eyes, but sleep felt impossible. Every car passing outside might be more police. Every shadow could be FBI agents looking for more secrets. Every creak of the house reminded her of heavy boots on wooden floors. Her mother's breathing eventually steadied into sleep, but Sarah lay awake, watching headlights move across her ceiling. Around midnight, a car stopped outside. She crept to the window to see a news van parked across the street. A reporter doing a silent stand-up in the glow of a camera light. Sarah thought about her father's face in the back of the police car, about the caught breath sound her mother made when the handcuffs clicked, About Mrs. Peterson's words. We all trusted him too. She pulled her diary out again and started a new entry. Dear Daddy, today the police took you away and nothing makes sense anymore. Mommy's crying all the time, but trying to hide it. The neighbors keep staring at our house. I don't know if I want to go to school tomorrow. I don't know anything anymore. She paused, pen hovering over the page. Outside, another car drove by slowly, its headlights sweeping across her window. Sarah added one last line. I wish this was just a bad dream. But when she finally fell asleep, her dreams were filled with clicking handcuffs and slammed doors, with her father's voice saying, be brave, while being pulled further and further away. The digital clock on her nightstand blinked 3:47 a.m. when she jolted awake from a nightmare. Her mother was still asleep beside her, face twisted with worry even in rest. Sarah lay in the dark, listening to the house settle, wondering if anything would ever feel normal again. Tomorrow waited like a monster under her bed, full of school and stares and questions she couldn't answer. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, she could pretend this was just another night, that her father was just working late, that their family wasn't splitting apart like the broken glass on her bedroom floor. The news van's camera light finally went dark. Sarah watched its taillights disappear around the corner, leaving their street in shadows once again. The investigators arrived at 10 a.m. on Saturday, their black SUVs lined up along the curb like crows on a wire. Sarah watched from behind the living room curtains as they knocked on Mrs. Peterson's door first. Sarah, get away from the window, her mother called from the kitchen. She was shoving papers into a shredder, the machine's grinding noise filling the house. Two men in suits walked up and down the street, notebooks in hand. Sarah saw them stop Mr. Garcia as he brought in his trash cans. He pointed at their house several times. The doorbell rang. Her mother froze, shredders still humming. Mrs. Anderson? A woman's voice called through the door. FBI, we need to ask you a few more questions. Sarah's mother unplugged the shredder, brushing paper fragments from her hands. Go to your room, Sarah. But dash now. Sarah climbed the stairs, but stopped halfway, crouching down to watch through the banister as her mother opened the door. Two agents stepped inside, a tall woman with short gray hair and a younger man carrying a leather briefcase. We won't take much of your time, the woman said, showing a badge. Agent Cooper, this is Agent Mills. I've already told the police everything I know. Her mother's voice was tired. My dad says your dad's going to prison forever. Sarah ran into the bathroom, locking herself in a stall as tears came. She stayed there until the bell rang, then through the Pledge of Allegiance and morning announcements. A knock on the stall door made her jump. Sarah? Mrs. Peterson's voice. She was the school counselor too, not just their neighbor. Want to talk? No. Sarah wiped her eyes. Leave me alone. Your mom called. She's worried. Did you tell her what you said on TV? A pause. Sarah, sweetheart, grown-up things are complicated. You said Daddy was bad. You were supposed to be our friend. I'm your friend. That's why friends don't lie. Sarah kicked the stall door. Everyone's lying. Daddy lied, you lied. Maybe Mommy's lying too. She heard Mrs. Peterson sigh. When you're ready to talk, my office is always open. Sarah waited until the bathroom was quiet again before emerging. She splashed water on her face and stared at herself in the mirror. The girl looking back seemed older somehow, like the last 3 days had aged her. She made it through most of the school day by keeping her head down, ignoring the stares and whispers. But in the last hour, during free reading time, she found a newspaper someone had left on her desk. Her father's mugshot stared up at her under the headline, Local Business Manager Arrested in Multi-Million-Dollar Fraud Scheme. Sarah ripped the paper to shreds. That earned her a trip to the principal's office, where she sat while they called her mother. More whispers followed her as she left school early, head high like her mother told her, even as tears threatened to fall. At home, she found her mother in her parents' bedroom, searching through drawers and closets. What are you looking for? Her mother jumped. Just paperwork. She closed the drawer quickly. How was school? Sarah shrugged. Can I help look? No, baby. Go to your homework. But later that night, after her mother fell asleep on the couch, surrounded by papers, Sarah snuck back into the bedroom. She found what her mother had been trying to hide, a stack of letters in the back of her father's sock drawer, all addressed to David Chun at AP. Oh! Box she didn't recognize. She opened one, hands shaking. Inside was a birthday card signed, "All my love, Lisa," with a photo of her father at that same beach, smiling at the camera with the strange woman. Sarah put everything back exactly as she found it and returned to her room. She pulled out her diary, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she drew a picture, her family as stick figures, her father getting smaller and smaller as he walked away, leaving her and her mother behind. The house creaked and settled around her as night fell. Outside, another news van drove past slowly. Sarah thought about all the lies hidden in drawers and storage units and offshore accounts. She thought about the stranger her father really was, living a whole other life while making pancakes on Sunday mornings and checking her math homework. She added one more thing to her drawing, a big black scribble over her father's stick figure, until he disappeared completely. Sarah stared at her reflection in the cafeteria's chocolate milk as the whispers swirled around her like autumn leaves. "I heard they took everything, even her house. My mom says they're probably broke now." The milk rippled as someone dropped into the seat across from her. Katie Chun, her best friend since kindergarten, set down her lunch tray with a clatter. "You weren't in class yesterday," Katie said. Sarah stirred her milk with a straw. "I went home early. My mom says I shouldn't sit with you anymore." The straw stopped moving. Sarah looked up, meeting Katie's eyes for the first time. They'd had sleepovers every Friday since first grade. Katie knew how she liked her popcorn and which stuffed animals needed to be arranged just so for proper tea parties. "Why not?" Katie glanced around before leaning closer. "She says your dad is a bad man, that he stole from people." "He didn't dash," Sarah started, but the words died in her throat. The birthday card signed Lisa flashed through her mind. "You don't have to sit here." "I know." Katie opened her lunch bag. "We have some new information about your husband's activities." Agent Cooper gestured to the couch. "Perhaps we should sit?" Sarah held her breath, pressing closer to the banister rails. "Did you ever visit Storage Unit 247 at Secure Space Storage on Mason Street?" Agent Mills asked, opening his briefcase. "No, I didn't know Mark had a storage unit. It was rented under the name David Chun." He pulled out photographs. "But we found these inside." Sarah couldn't see the photos from her position, but she saw her mother's face go pale. "These account statements go back 15 years, Agent Cooper said. "The deposits, the transfers, none of this looks familiar." "I told you, Mark handled all the finances." "Mrs. Anderson, your joint tax returns show an annual income of $60,000. But these accounts..." Agent Mills spread more papers on the coffee table. "We're talking millions." Sarah's mother pressed her hands to her mouth. "That's impossible. We also found these. More photographs. Taken at the Grand Cayman Marriott. Different women, different years." "Stop." Her mother stood up sharply. "My daughter is upstairs. Mrs. Anderson, we're trying to help you. If you knew about any of this dash, get out." Her mother's voice shook. "Get out of my house." After the agents left, Sarah found her mother sitting on the couch, staring at a worn shoebox she'd pulled from the hall closet. Old photos spilled across her lap. "Mommy?" Her mother quickly wiped her eyes. "I thought I told you to stay upstairs." Sarah picked up one of the fallen photos. Her father at a beach she didn't recognize, his arm around a woman who wasn't her mother. The date stamp read 2010. Her mother snatched the photo away. "You shouldn't see these." "Who is that lady?" "No one." Her mother shoved everything back in the box. "Just no one." The doorbell rang again. This time it was a man in a gray suit who introduced himself as Mr. Walsh, their lawyer. Sarah's mother sent her to her room again, but she snuck back to her listening spot on the stairs. "They've frozen all the accounts," her mother was saying. "I can't even buy groceries." "We'll file an emergency motion Monday," Mr. Walsh replied. "But Marie, this is serious. The evidence they have, the money laundering, the shell companies, the affairs. I don't want to know." Her mother's voice cracked. "I can't. You'll have to know eventually. The prosecution will ask if you were involved." "Involved?" Her mother laughed sharply. "I was teaching third grade while he... Sarah crept back upstairs as her mother started crying again. In her room, she pulled out an old shoebox of her own, filled with Father's Day cards, ticket stubs from movies they'd seen together, a World's Best Dad keychain she bought with her allowance. She dumped it all in the trash. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of ringing phones and knocked doors. Sarah's mother stopped answering both. On Sunday night, she tried calling the jail. "I'm sorry," Sarah heard her say. "Sarah's not ready to visit yet." "No, Mark, you don't get to decide that anymore." Monday morning came too soon. Sarah stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what brave girls wore to school when their fathers were in jail. "Ready?" Her mother appeared in the doorway, car keys in hand. "Do I have to go?" "Baby." Her mother sat on the bed. "I know it's hard, but we can't stop living our lives." "And you love school?" "Loved," Sarah corrected. "Before." The drive was silent. Sarah watched familiar houses pass by, wondering how many neighbors had talked to the FBI, how many had photos of their own family stored away in boxes. Her mother parked a block from school. "I'll pick you up right here at 3:15. If anyone says anything mean, I know. Tell the teacher, I love you." Her mother hugged her tight. "We're going to get through this." But as Sarah walked toward the school building, she heard the whispers start. "That's her. My mom said her dad stole millions. Is she still rich?" "Criminal." Sarah clutched her backpack straps tighter, trying to make herself smaller. She made it to her classroom door before Tommy Jenkins shouted across the hallway, "Hey, Anderson, want half my sandwich?" Before Sarah could answer, Tommy Jenkins walked by, deliberately knocking Sarah's milk carton over. Brown liquid spread across the table, dripping onto her jeans. "Oops," he smirked. "Better ask your dad to steal you some new pants." "Oh, wait." Katie jumped up as the milk reached her side of the table. "Tommy, you jerk." "Shut up, Chen. Or do you want everyone to know your dad's business with Mr. Anderson?" Katie's face went white. She grabbed her lunch bag and hurried away, leaving Sarah alone with the spreading puddle of milk and burning eyes of her classmates. In the bathroom, trying to clean her jeans with paper towels, Sarah heard girls coming in. "Did you see her face? Total karma. I heard her mom knew everything." Sarah locked herself in a stall, pressing her hands against her ears until the bell rang. When she finally emerged, she found "Criminal's Kid" written on her locker in black marker. The school counselor's office suddenly seemed like the better option. Mrs. Peterson looked up from her desk as Sarah walked in. "I was wondering when you'd come by. The nurse said I could skip class if I felt sick." Sarah sat in the oversized chair by the window. "I feel sick." Mrs. Peterson closed her door. "Want to talk about it?" "No." Sarah watched a police car cruise by the school, driving slowly like they all did now. "Did you know about my dad's other family?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Peterson sat down across from her. "What makes you think there's another family?" "I found pictures. And letters." Sarah picked at a loose thread on her milk-stained jeans. "Did you tell the FBI about that too?" Mrs. Peterson sighed. "Sarah, when adults do bad things, I don't want a counselor's speech." Sarah stood up. "I want someone to tell me the truth. Sometimes the truth is complicated." "No, it's not. Truth is truth. Lies are lies." Sarah's voice cracked. "Daddy's a liar. You're a liar. Everyone's lying." The phone on Mrs. Peterson's desk rang. She answered it, expression changing as she listened. "Yes, she's here. I understand. I'll send her right away." She hung up. "Your mother's here to pick you up. There's been a development with your father's case." Sarah's stomach clenched. "Is he coming home?" "No, sweetheart. The banks, they've frozen all your family's accounts. Your mother needs to deal with some things." In the car, her mother gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. "They took everything," she said quietly. "Every account, every credit card, even my teacher's pension." "But that's your money," Sarah said. "Not Daddy's. They think you might have put stolen money in my accounts." Her mother's voice shook. "They have to check everything. How will we buy food?" "Uncle Richard loaned us some cash. We'll be okay." But her mother's eyes were red-rimmed. "We just need to be careful for a while." That night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table watching her mother pay bills with shaking hands. The stack of envelopes seemed endless: mortgage, electricity, water, credit cards. Each one made her mother's shoulders sink lower. "$800 for the lawyer," she muttered. $2,000 for the mortgage. God, Mark, What did you do to us? The phone rang. Sarah had gotten used to her mother's standard response, no comment, but this time was different. Hello? Her mother's voice changed. Yes, this is Mrs. Anderson. What do you mean, unusual activity? That account was supposed to be closed years ago. Sarah watched her mother's face drain of color. No, I never authorized. There must be some mistake. Her mother sank into a chair. How much? Oh, God. After she hung up, she sat staring at the wall for a long time. Mommy, go to bed, Sarah. Please. But Sarah couldn't sleep. Through her bedroom floor, she heard her mother on the phone again. Richard, I need help. There's another account. No, I didn't know about it. The bank says, they say Mark was moving money through it for years, using my social security number. Sarah pulled her pillow over her head, but she could still hear the tears in her mother's voice. What am I going to do? They think I was involved. No, I can't afford another lawyer. The mortgage is due next week. A loud knock at the front door made them both jump. Sarah crept to her bedroom door as her mother answered it. Mrs. Anderson? A man's voice. Channel 7 News. We'd like to get your comment on the new allegations. No comment. The door slammed. More knocks followed. More voices calling questions through the door. Sarah heard her mother running around downstairs, locking windows, closing curtains. The house phone rang again. This time, Sarah picked up the extension in her room before her mother could get to it. Marie, a woman's voice she didn't recognize. It's Lisa. We need to talk about Mark. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. The woman from the beach photos. I know you're there, Lisa continued. Look, I'm not the only one. There are others. We all trusted him too. Click. Her mother had hung up the main line. Sarah quietly replaced her extension, heart pounding. Later, she found her mother sitting in the dark kitchen, surrounded by unpaid bills and bank statements. I can't sleep, Sarah said. Her mother held out her arms. Sarah crawled into her lap like she used to when she was smaller, breathing in her mother's lavender perfume. Baby, her mother whispered, I need you to be strong. Things are going to get harder before they get better. Because of the money? Because of a lot of things. Her mother's voice caught. We might have to move. Find a smaller place. Leave our house? Just for a while. Until I can. Her mother trailed off, staring at the pile of bills. Sarah thought about her room, her school, Katie's house next door where they had sleepovers. Because of what Daddy did. Because sometimes when people do bad things, they hurt everyone around them. Even people they love. Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see police lights reflecting off the houses across the street. Another slow drive-by. Another reminder that their life wasn't their own anymore. I hate him, she whispered into her mother's shoulder. Her mother didn't answer, just held her tighter as tears fell silently into Sarah's hair. The phone rang at 2:17 p.m. on a Wednesday. Sarah watched her mother's hand hover over the receiver, trembling slightly before picking it up. Hello. Her mother's voice was tired. They'd stopped saying Anderson residence weeks ago. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, half-heartedly coloring in her math homework margins. She'd gotten used to her mother's phone responses. No comment for reporters. We can't right now for neighbors. Please stop calling for bill collectors. But this time was different. Yes, this is Marie Anderson. Her mother's spine straightened. Who is Oh, I see. Sarah looked up. Her mother's face had gone chalk white. Are you sure? Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper. All of them? The crayon in Sarah's hand snapped in half. How many accounts? Her mother grabbed a pen, scribbling numbers on the back of an envelope. In the Caymans? Singapore too. Sarah slid off her chair, moving closer. What shell companies? More writing. Her mother's hand shook so badly the numbers were barely legible. And the property in Belize? The pen clattered to the floor. Sarah picked it up, but her mother didn't seem to notice. Children? Her mother's voice cracked on the word. How? How many? Sarah froze, pen halfway to the table. Names. I need their names. Her mother fumbled for paper, knocked over a glass of water. Didn't even flinch as it spread across the bills. Lisa Chin's son, yes. Maria Rodriguez's twins. God, how old? Sarah backed away as her mother wrote more names. Children's names. Other families' names. 8. Her mother pressed her free hand against her mouth. 8 children? Sarah ran upstairs, but she could still hear her mother's voice floating up. All these years. How did you find? Internal audit? I see. A long pause. Yes, I understand what this means for the case. Sarah sat at the top of the stairs, hugging her knees. The front door opened. She hadn't even heard anyone knock. A man in a suit walked in, phone to his ear. Mrs. Anderson? He lowered his phone. I'm on the line with you now. We should talk in person. Sarah watched her mother sink into a kitchen chair, phone falling from numb fingers. 8 children, she repeated. 8 families. Mrs. Anderson, the man sat across from her. I'm Jason Cooper from the bank's fraud investigation unit. What I'm about to tell you. Sarah, her mother's head snapped up, finally remembering her daughter. Baby, go to your room, but dash now. Sarah ran to her room, slammed the door, pressed her ear against it. These accounts, the man was saying, they were sophisticated. Multiple layers of shell companies, offshore trusts. I don't understand any of this. Her mother's voice shook. Mark was a store manager. No, Mrs. Anderson. Mark Anderson was never a store manager. The store itself was a front, a way to launder money from the other operations. Operations? Investment fraud primarily. He convinced people to invest their life savings in fake companies. Used that money to fund multiple lives, multiple families. Sarah heard her mother retch. Running water. The man's voice got closer to the stairs. Mrs. Anderson, please. There's more you need to know. More? A bitter laugh. What else could there possibly be? The house in Belize. The authorities found evidence. Photos. Records. Of what? Other children. Not just the 8 we know about. There might be more families, more accounts we haven't uncovered yet. Something shattered downstairs. Sarah jumped. Mrs. Anderson. The man's footsteps hurried across the kitchen. Here, sit down. Breathe. Get out. Her mother's voice was barely audible. We need to discuss Dash. Get out of my house. Sarah pressed her hands over her ears, but she could still hear things crashing downstairs. Glass breaking. Her mother screaming. The front door slamming. Then silence. Sarah counted 100 before creeping downstairs. The kitchen looked like a war zone. Broken glasses. Scattered papers. Water seeping into fallen photographs. Her mother sat in the middle of it all, clutching a piece of paper with names written on it. Names of other children. Other families. Other lives her father had built and destroyed. Mommy? Her mother's head jerked up. Her eyes were wild, unfocused. He had other children, she whispered. Other families. Other everything. Sarah stepped carefully around broken glass. Like Lisa's son? You knew about Lisa? I found pictures. In Daddy's drawer. Her mother stared at her for a long moment, then started laughing. A horrible, broken sound that turned into sobs. Sarah had never seen her mother cry like this. Not when the police came. Not when the accounts were frozen. Not even when Mrs. Peterson went on TV. 8 children, her mother kept saying. 8 other lives. 8 other versions of you. Sarah picked up a fallen photo. Her father at her 5th birthday party, helping her blow out candles. Was he at their birthday parties too? Her mother grabbed the photo, tore it in half, then quarters, then smaller and smaller until confetti rained down on the wet floor. The house phone rang again. Sarah watched her mother stare at it like it was a snake about to strike. It rang 7 times before stopping. Then her mother's cell phone started. Unknown number. Her mother answered with shaking hands. Hello? Sarah could hear a woman's voice on the other end. Angry. Crying. Yes, I just found out too. Her mother's voice was flat. No, I didn't know about. I understand. Yes, the investigators said. I see. She hung up. 30 seconds later, another call. Another angry voice. Another destroyed family. The calls kept coming. Sarah watched her mother answer each one. Listened to screaming, crying, accusations. Reply in that same dead voice. Yes, I understand. No, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Around the 5th call, there was a knock at the door. Sarah peeked through the window. Police cars in the driveway again. Mrs. Anderson? A familiar voice. Agent Cooper. We need to talk about the new evidence. Her mother didn't move from the kitchen floor. More knocking. More voices. Channel 4 News. FBI. Bank investigators. Sarah's mother finally stood up, glass crunching under her feet. She walked to the front door like a sleepwalker. No, she said through the door. No more questions. No more answers. No more anything. She turned to Sarah, swaying slightly. Pack a bag, she said. We're leaving. Leaving? Where? Anywhere. Somewhere they can't find us. Her mother looked around wildly. We have to. She crumpled suddenly, like a puppet with cut strings. Sarah ran to her as she hit the floor. Mommy! Her mother's eyes fluttered. Call Uncle Richard. Sarah grabbed her mother's phone, found Uncle Richard's number with trembling fingers. Marie. He answered on the first ring. Uncle Richard, Mommy fell down. Sarah's voice came out in a sob. There are people outside, and she won't get up and dash. I'm on my way. Call 911, Sarah. Right now. Sarah dialed 911 with one hand, holding her mother's cold fingers with the other. Outside, cameras flashed through the windows. More cars arrived. More voices called questions. But Sarah focused only on her mother's pale face, on counting her shallow breaths, on praying this wasn't one more thing her father had broken beyond repair. The hospital walls were too white. Sarah sat in a chair too big, swinging feet that couldn't reach the floor, watching nurses pass by like ghosts in squeaky shoes. Uncle Richard paced the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. She's stable, he was saying. Stress-induced collapse? No, Marie's not talking to reporters. Keep them away from the house. A doctor in a white coat stopped him. Mr. Thompson? A word. Sarah strained to hear as they stepped aside. Your sister's blood pressure was dangerously high, the doctor said quietly, combined with severe anxiety and dehydration. Has she been eating? Sleeping? Uncle Richard ran a hand through his gray hair. It's been difficult. Her husband Dash, we've seen the news. The doctor glanced at Sarah, lowered his voice further. She needs rest. Real rest. Away from all this. There's no way, Uncle Richard said. The press is everywhere. The FBI, the bank investigators. Then find a way. The doctor's voice was firm. Or next time could be worse. Sarah watched them talk more, their mouths moving without sound reaching her. A nurse brought her a juice box. She didn't drink it. They let her see her mother an hour later. The hospital room was small, beeping with machines. Her mother looked tiny in the big bed, skin almost as white as the sheets. Hey, baby? Her mother's voice was raspy. I'm sorry I scared you. Sarah climbed carefully onto the bed. Are you sick? No, just tired? Her mother tried to smile. Very tired. Uncle Richard appeared in the doorway. Marie, we need to talk about next steps. Not now, Richard. Yes, now. He closed the door. The press is camped outside your house. The FBI wants to question you again. The bank investigators Dash. I can't. Her mother's voice cracked. I can't do this anymore, which is why you're coming to stay with me. Both of you. Sarah looked up. Leave our house? Just for a while, Uncle Richard said. My lake house in Vermont. It's quiet there. No press. No investigators. Run away, you mean? Her mother's laugh was bitter. Like Mark Ran? Hide in another life. Don't. Uncle Richard's voice sharpened. Don't compare this to what he did. You need to protect yourself. Protect Sarah. A nurse came in to check vitals. Sarah watched the numbers on the machines change, pretending they made sense. The lake house has good schools. Uncle Richard continued after the nurse left. Sarah can finish the year there. Give everyone time to process. Process? Her mother's hands twisted the sheets. Process what? That my husband had 8 other children? That he stole millions? That every moment of our life together was a lie? Mommy! Sarah touched her arm. The skin felt cold. Her mother deflated. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Pack what you need tonight, Uncle Richard said. I'll have movers get the rest later. We leave tomorrow. What about the house? Sarah asked. My room? My toys? The house? Her mother's voice faded. The FBI might seize it anyway. Evidence? Sarah thought about her bedroom, her books, Katie next door. But a commotion in the hallway cut her off. Raised voices. Running feet. Uncle Richard opened the door. A reporter had somehow gotten past security. Camera raised. Mrs. Anderson. Comment on the new allegations? The other families? Security guards appeared, dragging the reporter away. But not before several pictures were taken. Not before Sarah saw her mother curl into herself like she was trying to disappear. "Tomorrow," Uncle Richard said firmly, closing the door. First light. They discharged her mother that evening. Uncle Richard drove them home in his car with tinted windows. News vans lined their street. Cameras flashed as they rushed inside. "Pack light," her mother said, voice dull. "Just essentials." Sarah stood in her room, staring at her things. What was essential? Her school books? Her diary? The photo album of lies? She opened her closet, started pulling clothes into a suitcase. Stopped when she found the dress she'd worn for last year's family photo, yellow, with a white collar. Her father had called her his sunshine in it. Sarah ripped the dress in half. Then she ripped everything else he'd ever given her. Books, toys, cards. By the time her mother came to check on her, the room looked like it had snowed paper and fabric. "Oh, Sarah." Her mother sank to her knees in the debris. "He bought these with stolen money," Sarah said. "Didn't he? With money from other kids like me?" Her mother pulled her close. They sat together in the destruction, listening to phones ring unanswered downstairs. Around midnight, another call came, different from the others. "Marie?" A man's voice on speaker. "It's Greg Chun, Katie's father." Sarah's mother almost dropped the phone. "Greg, the FBI came to see me today. About the money, Mark. The investments Greg, I'm so sorry. I didn't know Dash. 20 years of friendship. Our children grew up together. And all this time," Sarah thought about Katie running away at lunch. About Tommy Jenkins' words. "Your dad's business." "How much?" Her mother whispered. "Everything." Greg's voice broke. "Our savings, Katie's college fund." He said it was a sure thing. A special investment. Just for friends. Sarah's mother pressed her hands to her mouth. "We're losing the house," Greg continued. "The restaurant, everything. God, Marie, how could he do this to us? To all of us?" The line went dead. Sarah watched her mother walk to her bedroom like a zombie. Heard drawers opening, closing. Found her sitting on the floor surrounded by wedding photos. He was best man at their wedding, her mother said to no one. Godfather to their daughter. And the whole time, she struck a match. Let the photos catch fire one by one in the bathroom sink. Sarah watched the flames eat her father's face, turning memories to ash. They left before dawn. Sarah's small suitcase. Her mother's 2 bags. Uncle Richard's car waiting in the dark. As they pulled away, Sarah saw movement in Katie's window. A small hand pressed against glass. Then gone. "The lake house is beautiful in winter," Uncle Richard said as they hit the highway. "You can see the stars for miles." Sarah's mother didn't respond. She stared straight ahead, hands clenched in her lap. Sarah watched their neighborhood disappear in the rear window. The news vans. The familiar houses. The life they were leaving behind. She thought about Katie. About Greg Chin's broken voice. About 8 other children in 8 other homes, maybe packing their own bags right now. Running from the same lies. The same man. The same broken trust. The sun rose as they drove north, painting the world in shades of pink and gold. A new day. A new life. Sarah took out her diary, the only thing she'd kept from her father. On the last clean page, she wrote, "Today we ran away. Not like Daddy did. We ran to get better, to get stronger, to start over." She looked at her sleeping mother, at Uncle Richard's worried eyes in the rearview mirror. "Please let us get stronger," she whispered to the rising sun. The lake house smelled like dust and forgotten summers. Sarah stood in the doorway, suitcase clutched tight, watching Uncle Richard open windows to let in the cold Vermont air. "It's not much," he said, flipping light switches. "But it's quiet." The furniture wore white sheets like ghost costumes. Sarah touched one, leaving a handprint in the dust. Her mother hadn't spoken since they crossed the state line. "Bedrooms are upstairs," Uncle Richard continued. "Sarah, you can take the one overlooking the lake." Sarah climbed the creaking stairs, each step echoing in the empty house. The bedroom was small, with faded blue wallpaper and a narrow bed under the window. Outside, gray water stretched to pine trees on the opposite shore. No other houses in sight. No neighbors to whisper. No reporters to hide from. I'll get groceries, Uncle Richard called up. Marie, you should rest. Sarah heard her mother's footsteps, slow and heavy, entering the other bedroom. A door closed. Silence. She unpacked her small suitcase, 3 pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, underwear, her diary. The dresser drawers stuck when she pulled them, smelling like mothballs and old wood. A door slammed downstairs. Uncle Richard's car starting. Leaving them alone, Sarah crept to her mother's door. Mommy? No answer. She opened the door slowly. Her mother lay on the bed, still in her coat and shoes, staring at the ceiling. Should I unpack your bags? Her mother didn't move. Later. Are you hungry? I can make sandwiches. Later, Sarah. Her mother's voice was flat. Just let me rest. Sarah closed the door quietly. Went downstairs to explore the house her mother had grown up in. Photos on the wall showed younger versions of her mother and Uncle Richard, swimming in the lake, building snowmen, holding fishing poles. No photos of her father. He'd never been here. The kitchen was big but outdated. Yellow linoleum floors. Avocado green appliances. Sarah opened cupboards until she found ancient boxes of crackers and cans of soup. She made herself lunch, ate alone at the big table, watched dust motes dance in sunbeams. Uncle Richard returned with bags of groceries and a stack of papers. School registration, he said, putting things away. You'll start Monday. What about my old school? I called them. They'll send your records. He paused. How's your mom? Sleeping. He sighed. She needs time, Sarah. We all do. Sarah helped him unpack groceries. Watched him make coffee. Listened to him climb the stairs to check on her mother. Marie. His voice drifted down. You need to eat something. I'm not hungry. The doctor said dash. I don't care what the doctor said. Sarah dropped the box of cereal she was holding. Uncle Richard came back downstairs, rubbing his face. She'll come around, he said, but he didn't sound sure. That night, Sarah lay in her new bed, listening to lake waves through the open window. The house made strange noises, creaking wood, rattling pipes, wind in old chimneys. She couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she heard her mother crying. Not the quiet sobs from before. Deep, raw sounds like something breaking. Sarah got up, found her mother sitting on the bathroom floor, surrounded by torn papers. More photos, letters, cards she must have packed without Sarah seeing. He sent roses every Valentine's Day, her mother said, not looking up. Red ones, always with the same card. To my one and only love. Sarah sat beside her, picked up a torn photo, her father holding someone else's baby. How many did he send, she asked. On Valentine's Day? Her mother laughed, sharp and ugly. 8 bouquets. 8 cards. 8 lies. She started ripping another photo. 8 everything. Sarah took her mother's hands, stopping her. The cuts on her fingers were starting to bleed. Let me help, she said. Together, they tore everything into tiny pieces, flushed the fragments down the toilet, watched their old life swirl away. When the sun rose, they were still sitting there. Sarah's mother touched her daughter's face like she was seeing her for the first time. I have to be stronger, she whispered. For you? We both do, Sarah said. They went downstairs together. Sarah made toast while her mother washed her face. Uncle Richard found them at the kitchen table, trying to eat. There's a small grocery store in town, he said carefully. And a library. Maybe we could drive in later. Sarah's mother nodded. A small thing, but Uncle Richard smiled like she'd moved mountains. They drove into town that afternoon, past bare trees and empty summer cottages. The grocery store had one aisle and a bell over the door. The library was smaller than Sarah's old bedroom. But no one stared. No one whispered. No one knew their name. I could get a job, her mother said suddenly, looking at a help-wanted sign in the store window. Start over. One thing at a time, Uncle Richard said. That night, Sarah helped her mother finally unpack. Hung clothes in empty closets. Put toothbrushes in bathroom cups. Small things. Normal things. Her mother found an old photo album in a drawer. Pictures of her own childhood at the lake house. She showed Sarah. Ice skating on the lake, summer swimming, fishing with Uncle Richard. I was happy here, she said softly. Before everything, we could be happy here too, Sarah said. Her mother didn't answer. But she didn't cry that night either. The weekend passed slowly. Sarah explored the property, a small dock, an overgrown garden, a shed full of rusty tools. Her mother started cleaning, attacking dust and cobwebs like they were personal enemies. Uncle Richard brought more papers. Insurance forms, bank statements, legal documents. The FBI is still investigating, he told her mother. They'll need to talk to you eventually. Not yet, her mother said, scrubbing windows harder. Please, not yet. Sunday night, Sarah laid out clothes for her new school. Plain jeans, plain shirt, nothing that could draw attention. Her mother came to tuck her in, the first time since the hospital. Are you scared? She asked, sitting on the bed. A little, Sarah admitted. Are you? All the time? Her mother smoothed the blanket. But we're together. That's what matters. Sarah showed her the diary entry from the car ride. Today, we ran away. Not like Daddy did. We ran to get better. Her mother read it, closed the diary carefully. You're right, she said. We're not running away. We're running towards something better. She kissed Sarah's forehead and left, leaving the door cracked open. Through it, Sarah could see her mother starting to clean another room, like she could scrub away the past if she just worked hard enough. The lake waves kept rhythm outside, steady as a heartbeat. Sarah thought about her old room, her old school, Katie next door, about 8 other children in 8 other beds, maybe looking out different windows right now. All of them starting over. She added to her diary. Day 1 of getting better. Mommy cleaned 6 windows and made toast. Small steps, but steps forward. The house creaked and settled around them, making space for their new life. Sarah fell asleep to the sound of her mother's cleaning, fighting back the darkness one room at a time. The prison looked nothing like Sarah expected. No high towers, no barbed wire, just a bland brick building with a sign reading Minimum Security Federal Correctional Institution. You don't have to do this, her mother said, gripping the steering wheel. They'd driven 4 hours from the lake house. Sarah stared at the entrance. Yes, I do. Uncle Richard opened her car door. I'll take her in, Marie. You can wait here. No. Her mother unbuckled her seatbelt. We do this together. The guard at reception made them empty their pockets. Made Sarah walk through a metal detector. Made her mother fill out forms with shaking hands. Inmate number? The guard asked. 47,891, her mother replied. She'd memorized it, like she'd once memorized their phone number, their address, their life. They followed a guard-down beige hallways that smelled like bleach. Sarah counted her steps. 27 to the security door. 43 to the visiting room. Hands on the table at all times, the guard instructed. No passing items, no physical contact. The visiting room had small tables bolted to the floor. Other families sat at them. Wives, children, mothers, all trying not to look at each other. Sarah saw him before he saw them. Orange jumpsuit. Thinner. Grayer. Different. Her father's face lit up. Sarah. Baby. She stopped walking. Her mother's hand found her shoulder. We can leave, she whispered. Sarah shook her head, walked to the table, sat down. Her father tried to reach for her hands, but the guard cleared his throat. Anderson. Rules. Right, sorry. He pulled back. Sarah, you've grown so much. How are you? How's school? Sarah stared at him. This stranger wearing her father's face. This liar who bought her birthday presents with stolen money. Why did you do it? The words came out before she could stop them. His smile faltered. Baby, it's complicated. Adult things, don't. Her mother's voice cut like ice. Don't you dare feed her more lies. Marie. He turned to her mother. Please, if you just let me explain, Explain what? The other families? The stolen money? 8 children, Mark. 8. I never meant to get caught. Her mother laughed that horrible laugh again. To destroy all those lives? Greg Chin's restaurant? Katie's college fund? Sarah watched her father's face change. The mask slipping. I was going to pay it all back, he said. The investments were real. Just Lisa's son, Sarah interrupted. Is he my age? Silence fell at their table. Her father's hands twitched on the metal surface. Sarah, answer her, her mother said. He's 7. Her father's voice was barely audible. His name is Michael. Sarah thought about the beach photos, the birthday cards, the lies. The twins, she asked. 5. He stared at his hands. Maria's girls. Anna and Eva. Stop, her mother whispered. But Sarah couldn't stop. How many birthdays did you miss? With them? With me? I try to be there for everyone by lying. Sarah's voice rose. Other families looked over. By stealing? By pretending? I loved you all, he said. I still love no. Sarah stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. You don't get to say that anymore. Guards moved closer. Her father raised his hands. Sarah, please. Sit down. Let me Let you what? Tell more lies? Steal more lives? Anderson, a guard warned. Keep it calm. Sarah felt tears coming. Fought them back. I thought you were the best dad ever, she said. But you were never really my dad at all. Were you? You were everybody's dad. Which means you were no one's. That's not true. He tried to stand. Guards moved in. Sarah, baby, please don't call me that. She backed away. Don't call me anything. Her mother stood too. We're done here. Marie, wait no, Mark. Her mother's voice was steady now. We're done waiting. Done believing. Done lying to ourselves about who you really are. They walked out together, Sarah's mother's arm around her shoulders. Behind them, her father called their names. Called promises. Called lies. They didn't look back. In the car, Sarah broke down. Deep, gasping sobs that hurt her chest. Her mother held her, crying too. I'm sorry, her mother whispered. I'm so sorry I brought you here. No. Sarah wiped her eyes. I needed to see. To know. Know what? That he's not my daddy anymore. He never really was. Uncle Richard drove them back to the lake house. 4 hours of silence. 4 hours of processing. Sarah watched towns pass through tear-blurred windows. Thought about Michael, Anna, Eva, her half-siblings she'd never meet. Wondered if they were crying too. At home, her mother went straight to the bathroom. Sarah heard retching, then water running, then silence. She found her mother in the kitchen later, making tea with shaking hands. He looked different, Sarah said. Prison changes people. Her mother stared into her cup. Or maybe it just shows who they really were all along. Sarah got her diary. Wrote, Today I saw a stranger wearing my father's face. Today I said goodbye to someone who never really existed. Her mother read over her shoulder, added in her own handwriting. Today we stopped waiting for lies to become truth. They sat together at the kitchen table until the tea went cold, until the sun set over the lake, until the house creaked and settled around them like a protective shell. What do we do now? Sarah asked. Her mother touched the diary page, where their handwriting mingled. We write our own story, she said. No more lies. No more pretending. Just us moving forward. Through the window, Sarah watched stars appear over the lake. Each one a tiny light in the darkness. Each one a step away from him. Away from lies. Away from broken trust. She added one more line to her diary. Today we started telling the truth. Spring came to the lake house like a gentle awakening. Sarah stood at her bedroom window, watching ice crack and drift on the water. 3 months since the prison visit. 2 since they'd stopped jumping at every phone ring. 1 since her mother's first real laugh. Progress measured in small victories. Sarah, her mother called up the stairs. Breakfast. The kitchen smelled like coffee and toast. Her mother stood at the stove in her work uniform. Blue polo shirt with Miller's Grocery embroidered on the pocket. Assistant manager now. Parent-teacher conference today, her mother said, sliding eggs onto Sarah's plate. Miss Roberts wants to talk about your writing. Sarah poked at her eggs. Is it because of my story? She said it was powerful. Her mother sat down with her coffee, writing about everything that happened. That takes courage. Sarah thought about the stories she'd written for class. No made-up characters. No fairy tale ending. Just truth. The day my father's lies came home. The class had been silent when she read it. Even Tommy Stevens, who used to tease her about her father, looked away. It helped, Sarah said, writing it down. Her mother touched the diary on the counter, bigger now, filled with their shared entries. It helps us both? Uncle Richard's car honked outside. He drove Sarah to school every morning on his way to work. Hold on. Her mother grabbed an envelope from the counter. This came yesterday. I think. I think you should read it. Sarah recognized the prison return address. Her mother hadn't opened it. Do you want to know what it says? Sarah asked. Only if you want to tell me. Sarah put the letter in her backpack. Later, at school, things were different now. No whispers, no stares, just normal seventh grade drama about who liked who and what was for lunch. Sarah had friends, real ones, not people who knew her story from the news, but people who knew her from art club and math class and sharing lunch tables. Hey, Sarah. Emily waved from her locker. Ready for the science test? Normal questions. Normal life. The letter stayed in her backpack until afternoon. Sarah read it during lunch, sitting by the lake behind school. Dear Sarah, her father wrote, I know words aren't enough. Nothing will ever be enough. But I need you to know. She stopped reading. Ripped the letter into tiny pieces. Let them fall like confetti into the water. Some words didn't deserve to be kept. The parent-teacher conference went well. Miss Roberts praised Sarah's honesty, her resilience, her way with words. She's helping other students, Miss Roberts said. Children from similar situations. They read her story. They feel less alone. Sarah waited outside while they talked more. Through the classroom window, she watched her mother wipe tears away. Happy tears she knew now. There was a difference. At home, her mother pinned Sarah's story to the fridge, right next to her work schedule and Uncle Richard's lake house renovation plans. I'm proud of you, her mother said, hugging her. So proud. Sarah breathed in her mother's new perfume. Not lavender anymore. Something fresher. Something her father had never smelled. The letter, Sarah said. He wrote about being sorry. About wanting forgiveness. Her mother stiffened slightly. And I gave his words to the lake. Sarah pulled back to see her mother's face. Some things don't need to be kept. Her mother nodded, understanding. That evening, they sat on the dock, feet dangling over newly thawed water. Uncle Richard was inside, fixing the kitchen sink. Normal sounds, normal life. I got another call, her mother said. From Lisa. Sarah watched ripples spread from her toes, touching water. Michael's mom? She's starting a support group. For all of us. The other families. Are you going to go? Her mother was quiet for a long time. Maybe. Someday. When it hurts less. Sarah leaned against her mother's shoulder. Does it hurt less now? Some days. Her mother stroked her hair. More and more days. They watched the sun set over the lake. Colors painted the water. Orange, pink, purple. Nature's art covering old scars. I have another story to write, Sarah said. About moving forward. What's it called? One day at a time. Her mother smiled. A real smile. That's our story now, isn't it? Sarah nodded. Their story. Their truth. Their life. Later, they made dinner together. Uncle Richard taught Sarah to fix a leaky faucet. Her mother helped with math homework. Normal things. Healing things. Before bed, they wrote in their shared diary. Sarah, today I gave Father's words to the lake. Some things are better left in the past. Her mother, today I watch my daughter choose healing over hurt. She teaches me how to be strong. Sarah, today we kept moving forward. Her mother, one day at a time. In her room, Sarah looked out at the star-covered lake. She thought about Michael, Anna, Eva, hoped they were finding their own way to heal. Hoped they had their own diaries, their own truth, their own paths forward. The house creaked gently, settled in its foundations. Not running away anymore. Not hiding. Just being home. Sarah opened her window to let in spring air. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called, a lonely sound, but not sad. More like a reminder that life goes on, changes, adapts. She thought about her father's letters sinking into lake water, about Miss Roberts sharing her story with other broken families, about her mother's growing smile and Uncle Richard's quiet strength. Family wasn't what she thought it was, all those breakfasts ago when police burst through their door. Family was what you built from broken pieces, what you chose to keep and what you chose to let go. Sarah added one final line to her diary. Today we are who we choose to be. Tomorrow we'll choose again. That's what healing means. The lake waves kept their steady rhythm, nature's heartbeat, counting out moments, hours, days. Each one a step forward, each one a small victory. Sarah closed her window, but left the curtains open. Let starlight paint patterns on her wall. Let the night remind her that darkness always gives way to dawn. One day at a time. That's how you rebuild a life. That's how you find your way home.